My name is Arthur Penn. I am 28 years old and I live in Portland, Oregon. I work as a freelance web developer, creating sleek, functional websites for small businesses right from my apartment in the Richmond neighborhood. My place is my sanctuary, filled with thriving plants, the comforting aroma of good coffee, and the quiet hum of productivity. I value order and peace. My life, for the most part, flowed along as smoothly as the Willamette River, predictable and calming until Mark moved in. Mark and I knew each other vaguely from college. He was always loud, the kind of guy who commanded a room without really saying anything substantial. He found my spare room listed on Craigslist after a sudden breakup, and at first I thought it would be fine. We were adults, after all, and I believed we could coexist. But then the comments started. They weren't direct insults, not at first, but little digs, always framed as jokes, somehow always aimed right at me. "Must be nice to just sit on your couch all day calling it work, Arthur," he'd say with a smirk as I was deep in code. Or if I looked stressed, "Wow, you're really intense for someone who doesn't even have to put on pants to earn a living." It was a constant drip, a low-grade disrespect that made my own home feel like a minefield. He'd correct my cooking in front of friends, critique my laundry folding technique, even mock the way I organized my recycling. Nothing big enough to cause an explosion, but enough to erode my comfort. If I ever tried to explain or defend myself, he'd just laugh it off, dismissing my feelings as me being too sensitive or overthinking things. I dreaded coming out of my room, anticipating the next bob. One evening, after a particularly grating comment about my unnecessary plant collection, which I carefully cultivated, I decided I had to address it. I cornered him in the kitchen, taking a deep breath. I was calm, I was clear, and I articulated precisely how his words made me feel, how they impacted my peace in our shared space. He looked at me, shrugged his shoulders, and with that familiar smirk playing on his lips, he said, word for word, "Look, I'm just honest. People should be tougher." That sentence hit me like a cold wave, chilling me to the bone. It wasn't just a statement. It was his shield, his weapon, and his entire life philosophy all rolled into one dismissive phrase. That's when I knew with absolute certainty that I couldn't just talk my way out of this. For a few days after that conversation, I tried to ignore him even more, retreating further into my room, using my noise-canceling headphones almost constantly. But that only made me a prisoner in my own home, ceding more territory to his insidious behavior. I felt a constant, angry simmer of resentment inside me, and it was draining my energy, affecting my focus. My work suffered, my plants looked droopy, and even Portland's usually vibrant charm felt muted and gray. I even considered just moving out myself, but the thought infuriated me. Why should I be the one to leave, to uproot my life, because of his casual cruelty? That line, "people should be tougher," kept echoing in my head, a mocking refrain. Then a different thought sparked, a tiny flicker of defiance. What if I was tougher? Not by yelling back, not by stooping to his level of open aggression, but by turning his own words, his own philosophy against him. What if I took his honesty and his toughness, advice absolutely literally, embracing it as gospel? I decided to become a mirror, reflecting his words back with calm, unwavering precision. The very next time he made a snide comment about my weird vegan meals, something I had been preparing for years, I didn't get defensive, didn't offer an explanation. I just looked at him, gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, and said clearly and without emotion, "Good to know. Thanks for the feedback." Then, to emphasize my sincerity, I pulled out my phone and typed a quick note in the app, pretending to record his brilliant insight. He paused, a flicker of confusion in his eyes, his smirk faltering for a moment. Later, when he loudly complained about the internet speed, something he often did, I remembered him saying, "Relax, it's not a big deal," in a different context. So I calmly repeated, "Okay, I'll remember that, Mark. You said it's not a big deal, so I'll try not to worry." He just blinked at me. This quiet, emotionless approach was far harder than I had anticipated. It felt unnatural, like I was playing a character in a bad play, suppressing every natural urge to react, to defend, to feel. My chest would tighten, a knot of anxiety, but I would force a neutral expression, a bland tone, and say, "You told me people should be tougher. I'm trying to learn." There were moments I questioned if I was just being childish, if I was stooping to his level of manipulation, just in a different form. I felt isolated in my own silent war, wondering if anyone else would ever notice the subtle cruelty or my equally subtle retaliation. I felt completely alone in the apartment, even when he was physically there. I felt low, utterly spent, unsure if this would ever truly work, convinced I was just making myself seem strange. The turning point, the climax of my silent campaign, came during a game night we hosted with a group of mutual friends. Mark was in his element, holding court, telling exaggerated stories and dominating the conversation. Then he spotted me about to put my plate in the dishwasher, an action I'd always performed immediately after eating. "Look at Arthur, always so particular about the dishes," he joked loudly, nudging a friend beside him. "Can't just leave them for the morning, can you, Arthur?" Instead of my usual silent internal sigh or the forced smile I used to give, I simply smiled pleasantly at him. "You know, Mark," I said, my voice even and clear for everyone to hear, "you taught me that honesty is important, so I truly appreciate you always being so honest about my dish habits." A few friends exchanged quick, knowing glances, a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Mark's laugh was a little too loud, a little too forced. He added, "I'm kidding, obviously." But it landed with a thud, his usual charm evaporating. From that evening on, I escalated my method. When the landlord called about the consistently overflowing recycling bin, something Mark was definitely responsible for but always blamed on everyone in the apartment, I calmly explained over the phone, with Mark within earshot. "Oh, Mark said it's not a big deal. He told me people should be tougher about those kinds of things, so I assumed he was handling it, or that it wasn't a problem." The landlord, who had dealt with Mark's excuses before, raised an eyebrow at me, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. When a mutual friend later mentioned the persistent mess in the living room, specifically a pile of Mark's shoes, I replied, "Mark often says people are too sensitive about things like that. I'm just following his advice and trying to be tougher about tolerating the mess." Slowly, subtly, people started to look at Mark differently. Not with anger or open judgment, but with a slight, almost imperceptible shift in their expressions. That little pause, that flicker of understanding when his words were repeated, now tied to his own messy behavior. His jokes began to land with a jarring dullness. He'd stammer, add apologetic qualifiers too late, his usual bravado deflating like a punctured balloon. He lost his audience, lost the easy laughter he always commanded. The power of his words, once his weapon against me, was being turned back on him, making him look not like an honest truth-teller, but a thoughtless hypocrite. One quiet evening, a few weeks after the game night incident, he finally confronted me directly, his face tight with frustration, his voice low and strained. "Why are you being so weird and passive-aggressive, Arthur?" he demanded, clearly at his wit's end. I looked at him, genuinely puzzled by his accusation, and said, in a calm, even tone, "I'm not being weird, Mark. I'm not being passive-aggressive. I'm taking your advice seriously. You told me people should be tougher and that honesty is important. I've been trying my absolute best not to be sensitive and to accept your feedback." He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly, searching for a comeback he couldn't find. The silence stretched, heavy with the weight of his own words now used against him. He had absolutely nothing to say. After that, the comments dried up, completely. The apartment slowly but surely regained its peaceful vibe, the tension dissolving. About a month later, Mark announced he was moving out. There was no apology for his past behavior, no big goodbye party, no explanation for his sudden departure. He just left. A few weeks after he was gone, a mutual friend mentioned, almost as an aside, that Mark had told them I was hard to read. I just smiled, a deep, genuine smile that reached my eyes. That, to me, was the highest compliment he could have unknowingly given me. He couldn't understand me because I had simply learned to speak his language perfectly and without emotion. My home became my sanctuary once again, filled with the quiet I cherished and the vibrant life of my plants. But I was different. I understood the subtle, insidious power of words and the silent strength of knowing exactly how to use them, or rather, how to let others unknowingly hang themselves with their own. I didn't just get my revenge. I learned to cultivate a quiet, unyielding strength that made me truly impermeable to the little tyrannies and manipulative words of the world. And sometimes, just sometimes, I still jotted down interesting observations in my phone, just in case.